from RSA Conference 2024 Tech Target Editorial, Ion Tech from San Francisco. I am here today with our guest, Josiah Dykstra. Welcome, Josiah.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Josiah is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Trail of Bits. We're talking to Josiah today because he released a book last year called Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Josiah's background, this book where we go over the most popular myths and debunk them if necessary. So Josiah, can you tell us a little bit about your experience and your background in cybersecurity?
Absolutely, glad to do that. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be able to talk about this and bring some attention to things that I care a lot about. My background is all in computer science. I've spent more than 20 years in cybersecurity, sort of started with a PhD, gave me a lot of grounding, and I've been able to apply that in things like national security and various parts of cybersecurity. I eventually became very interested in humans, for example. I never took any courses in school about psychology or economics, but humans became fascinating to me. So I've gotten to sort of branch out from traditional pure technology, computer science, into these other areas. How can I use that to help national defense? How can I use it to help people? I spent more than 19 years at the National Security Agency, where I got to do a wide variety of things. Very fulfilling, glad to have been able to do that. And I have transitioned into a role at Trail of Bits, where we do software security, research and consulting to help make sure that ecosystem is equally secure. So gotten to branch out a bit. I also enjoy doing education. So the fact that I can do writing and speaking is a chance to share things I've learned and sort of encourage the conversation, push the sort of leadership side of cybersecurity in a way that I find very fulfilling. So every day is a new adventure, like for most of us.
Amazing. And I love your angle that about people, about humans, because like cybersecurity, we really think about systems and software, but it's the people operating them and implementing them. Can you talk a little bit about like how human nature comes into play in this world?
Absolutely. And this is something that, again, I wasn't trained in school and I didn't appreciate. I know a lot about how that device works, but again, it's a little bit strange that I wasn't given more insight about the people, because the only reason we have technology is for people to use. People design it, people make use of it, people attack it. And so knowing how those humans work is a really critical part of cybersecurity. So I want to know, for instance, what biases does a developer bring to assumptions that they make? What assumptions do they make about the kind of technology? Is this the latest phone? Is this 10 or 20 years old? What can it do or not do? Assumptions about how the users are going to use it. Are they always going to make the best decision possible for them in sort of a pure economic sense? Or are they going to make the sort of contextual decision? I don't know whether to click on that link, but I don't know it any better, so I'm just going to click it. And then how are attackers going to choose me versus another victim? How are they going to decide how to attack me? How are they going to know, how will I know when they get tired or fed up? All of those, I think, are fabulous questions.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about your recent book, again, Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions. Why this topic? Why did you decide to write this book?
It was fun. It was fabulously fun. And I had two great co-authors, Professor Gene Spafford at Purdue and Dr. Lee Metcalf, who's in the CERT division at Carnegie Mellon. Between the three of us, we have close to 100 years of experience. Most of those are not from me, but we collectively had started to see sort of persistent, sticky myths in the ecosystems that we lived in. So in academia and government and industry, things that, despite a lot of education, weren't going away. And we wanted to address those. We wanted to put some truth out there a little bit, but also to recognize that these fields evolve. And so the things that I learned in school 20, 30 years ago, not all of those are true anymore. And there are lots of people in cybersecurity who have a fixed point in time education, and we wanted to bring them up to speed about what was going on. I think this is useful not only for tech people, but for decision makers who might have a preconception that, well, we're too small to be a victim, and so we won't prioritize. We came up with more than 175 things like that. Not that people are trying to deliberately do the wrong thing or ignoring best practice sort of guidance, but we thought we can make things better. And so we wanted to start to document those things and had fabulous fun doing it.
Amazing. Yeah. I don't think we have time for all 170 something of those, but we're going to talk about a couple. So in the book, you debunk the myth that any system can be made completely secure. Is that true? How should businesses reconcile their needs for understanding that no system can actually be entirely foolproof?
This is a lot of people in cybersecurity know this. They know that this to be true, but we also hear people who say, well, security is a goal. I can get to lower my risk to zero and then move on. Not everybody falls for that pitfall, but many people do.
Mhm.
And so we tried to reiterate that this is a spectrum and that we can manage risk. There's lots of ways to manage risk technologically, training, insurance, wide range of options here,
Mhm.
but I can't get it to zero. Now, I work for a company who advocates for security engineering, and that is wildly needed. We must build systems that are as secure as possible while also recognizing that we can't get it to zero.
Right.
How do we make them tolerant to that? How do we make them resilient to bouncing back when inevitably we can't find all the bugs?
Mhm.
So it's not that we need one or the other, but the world is not over. We can't give up and say, well, I can't get rid of all the bugs, so I'm not even going to try.
Mhm.
That is a different sort of view of that same myth.
Right.
We have to try. We have to do the best that we can do and also have this resilience.
Mhm. So balance, really, like doing the best you can to try to get to zero, to try to get to the safest and most secure you can be, but understanding you need to have backup plans and know where your faults may be. Yeah.
I would describe that as both and. It's not a teeter-totter where I can pick
Right.
50-50, but it's I must do as good as possible. I must have the most secure code. I must install the patches. And I also must have the backups. I also must be ready for an incident. We must have incident response plans, for
Mhm.
example.
Yeah, absolutely. With ransomware evolving, what do you see as the most underrated strategy for organizations to defend against ransomware attacks?
This is a great question. I think there's a lot of conversation about everybody should have backups. Absolutely, you must. Everybody should have good education.
Mhm.
Absolutely, you must. What I want to see more of is rehearsal, by which I mean have a plan and test the plan. We can't get the likelihood of ransomware to zero. I don't know the likelihood that any given company will have ransomware tomorrow. That likelihood is not 0%. It is not 100%. There are no guarantees that anybody's going to get ransomware. It's a fuzzy in between there. But that means we all must be prepared. And
Mhm.
preparation can be things like backups. One of the things I worry a lot about is people who have plans that haven't been tested recently, that might not be effective. And so, in the heat of the moment, they're having to make new decisions.
Mhm.
And those decisions will be probably not the best decisions they could make because they're in the middle of a crisis.
Mhm.
The same way that a basketball team practices before the game is to be ready. And we hear lots of sports athletes talk about how the game, sort of in their brain, moves in slow motion. Not because it's actually doing that, but because they have a lot of rehearsal. They know what
Mhm.
to expect. They're not having to make new choices in the heat of the moment. We have fire drills for the same reason. If there's a fire and we don't know the exit to the building, maybe we run around in circles. Maybe it's bad for our health. Maybe we end up taking the longest path through the building as
Right.
opposed to the shortest one. So in a ransomware attack, you don't want to have to make new decisions in that crisis.
Right.
So moving the preparation ahead of time, having rehearsals that go through it means better outcomes in the end.
Mhm.
That's what I'm focused on.
What might a rehearsing a ransomware fire drill look like? Like,
It depends on the maturity of the organization. A one-person small business might not be able to take a day off and close the business and
mhm.
pretend like, let's walk through what happens if the payment system doesn't come up tomorrow. In a very robust, mature organization, they might have a whole team who does continuity planning, disaster recovery. They have many books on the shelf, playbooks. And
Mhm.
so it's a spectrum. It might be just a conversation. A cybersecurity person who just talks to the small business owner and says, have you thought about what would happen if you couldn't boot your computer? Who would you call?
Mhm.
In 10 minutes, we can have a productive conversation. It's not the same as, all right, we're going to actually turn the power off and walk through this scenario.
Mhm.
And that's different than what a government organization might do. So depending on who you are and the risks that you have to manage, those preparations look different.
Absolutely. Okay, we have to talk about AI, obviously, touching every single corner of the world right now. What are some myths that businesses might believe about AI's role in identifying and mitigating threats?
There's no escape from AI.
Yeah.
There's no escape because it is all around us and everybody's talking about it.
Mhm.
And it is a new technology that will not disappear. It will evolve. What I say today might not be true tomorrow. I know what the world was like yesterday.
Mhm.
Today, it's probably changed again.
Mhm.
And that leads to a lot of pitfalls. One pitfall is that AI will replace us. And I think that is an extreme end of the spectrum. I can't guarantee that won't happen, but it doesn't seem to be the most likely. And when I try to take sort of a clear picture of what AI is and what it can do, I try and think about those kind of probabilities.
Mhm.
I know that it's not infallible. It's not a silver bullet that can make every intrusion detection report automatically generated without a human with no errors. And so thinking about what assumptions am I making in the use of this AI? What do I think it can do and can't do? How do I validate it? It is a powerful tool to help do things that a computer is very good at.
Mhm.
But it is not yet at the point where it can do human decision making. I should not trust everything that it says. And so that is where we need to be sort of cautious when we look at what our vendors selling or what kinds of problems am I even trying to solve with this. It's not a hammer that can solve every problem.
Right. What about AI's role in the emergence of new attack vectors or threats?
That is certainly something that people are thinking about and we must be aware of.
Mhm.
Does it allow attackers to send better phishing emails that are more dangerous, that are harder to detect, that are more tailored to me or to you? We must be aware that they are doing that.
Right.
We don't really have a good sense for how prevalent that is,
Mhm.
but it is in the realm of possibility. But that has always been true in cybersecurity. There's always been this race between, well, it's easy to send emails, it's easy to send fake text messages. We have to acknowledge that. We have to be able to respond. We have to use the technology for defense in a similar way that the attackers are using it for offense.
Mhm. And there's also that human element again, like education of educating your employees and how to respond to messages that may be you know more sophisticated AI messages, phishing scams, things like that. Yeah, any commentary on how human nature plays a role in AI threats?
This is a really important area of conversation. I have this with people in my own family and friend circles, which is if you get a call from me and it sounds like me, there's a lot of voice recordings of my voice on the internet. Somebody could have trained a system that sounds exactly like me.
Hmm.
How would you know? If you were
Right.
suspicious, if I was asking you for money, how would you validate that? Let's just have that sort of open conversation. Um, because the technology is getting very good. And if they don't know that that could happen, humans are inherently trustful, especially in Western countries. We want to be helpful. We see this go wrong in all kinds of ways where a help desk resets a password erroneously. How should they validate those kinds of claims? Um, but again, we have to be careful about the assumptions in the designs of those systems too. So a developer might allow, this happened in the SolarWinds case, a user to pick a weak password. SolarWinds, it was in part because of this SolarWinds 123 password. Why did we blame the user? The CEO of SolarWinds blamed the user for this. Why did the system developers allow somebody to pick that password?
Hmm.
It should not be possible. It should be less likely for me to make bad decisions, which is why there's such a push for things like secure by design, a fine concept, to make sure that the developers as humans are also not making wildly poor assumptions about how
Hmm.
users will use the system.
We were just in another conversation earlier saying that if somebody makes a deep fake of you, you know you've made it. If you're that important for somebody to
Probably true.
program a model after you. But here's to hoping it doesn't actually happen. All right, let's switch tracks a little bit. Another common myth concerns supply chain security. What steps should companies take to realistically assess and mitigate their risks within their supply chains?
Supply chain is a real threat. It is, again, an area of research about how sort of likely is this to happen? How devastating would it be if it did happen? So again, more than zero, less than 100% probability. We must just give it its due attention. And that is a lot of preparation. It's a lot of continual evaluation, which is we can't just sort of look at any part of supply chain, whether that's software supply chain, whether it's the update ecosystem for the software on your system, whether it's the hardware that you purchase or the third parties that you work with. We can't just be satisfied that we did an evaluation, it's done. People with compliance mentality sometimes take that as like it's just a checkbox. One of the myths we talk about in the book is that compliance is not the same as security. You can be 100% compliant and wildly insecure. Those things were never meant to be the same. And so people erroneously make the assumption that if I'm compliant, things are okay. If I've done my supply chain check, we're good for forever. That's a continual process. That's, I think, an important pitfall that people sometimes fall into, even in supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Josiah, are there any other top tier myths and any truth behind them that we should know before we leave this conversation?
We cover a wide spectrum. We talk about things we see in the movies and things. The one that I often highlight to people is that all bad outcomes are the result of a bad decision. It sort of feels intuitively like if something goes wrong, who is to blame for that? What did we do wrong that led to that bad outcome? And what we describe in that myth is sometimes they're not related. Like we made all the right decisions in the heat of the moment or in our business process, and a bad thing still happened. That doesn't mean there's necessarily a person to point to or a failure. You might have done everything right. But again, the world we don't have control over everything. A related myth in that same section is that security people control all the security outcomes. We all have jobs. Everybody at RSA lives, breathes security, and it matters. The things that we do, the jobs that we have do matter. And I cannot control every security outcome. I don't know when the attackers will attack. I don't control that. I don't control whether there will be a 0-day tomorrow that affects my systems. So we need to give security people a little bit of breathing room, because if we hold them to impossible standards, they get burnt out. They have impossible goals, like there can be 0 data breaches is an impossible goal. And so those are the kind of things that I tend to highlight, especially to business leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we're human. We're not machines.
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much, Josiah, for talking with us today at RSA 2024. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we're going to be streaming later today, all through this week. So come back, subscribe, like, comment, and check out Josiah's book, Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions. Thank you.